Good afternoon. Mr. Reed, are you interested in learning more about the Church of Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
Wow. No, you read more than we do. No, seriously, Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed.
Well, ladies, I think it is time.
Time for what?
Time for enlightenment.
Oh.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for watching. I am here with Scott, Beck, and Bryan Woods, a couple of Hollywood filmmakers. You might know them from A Quiet Place, but their newest film, Heretic, is coming out November 8th. And we're going to talk about that film as well as all things Hollywood and their Iowa upbringings. Scott and Bryan, thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So let's start at the start. You both attended the University of Iowa. You grew up in Iowa. Tell us about how you both kind of came to love movies, how you met each other, and how you got started here in Iowa.
So Bryan and I, we grew up in the Quad Cities, and we met when we were 11 years old. We discovered both of us had this fascination of making stop motion movies with our action figures. And from there, it just was like making one film after another, coercing our friends or our family to star in our ambitious no budget feature films that we'd shoot all around like Bettendorf and Davenport. And we just fell in love with filmmaking. We fell in love with like the culture that we were finding in the area. So many of our movies were made possible because of, areas around Iowa that were just excited about the idea of making movies or holding local casting calls and discovering these incredible actors that were doing regional theater, but all of a sudden they wanted to try, their acting in front of a camera. And that really led us into this love of filmmaking. And we had this ambition, maybe we could try to make this a career.
And the Iowa community was always so insanely supportive of our work. They would, always show up to all of our, little premieres and encourage us to keep making films. And as Scott said, the talent in the state was so profound. All of our actors and crew were, local, local actors and creatives, and it was an amazing time to kind of learn how to make movies and grow up here.
When you talk about kind of that community pride, the community investment and involvement, do you think that's something that is unique to Iowa? You all have traveled, you've been in Hollywood, you've certainly shot in different locations, looked at ideas, pitched ideas. Do you think that's a kind of a uniquely Iowan thing to have that support and just that, feedback that you're going to get from maybe community members or instructors or whoever it is along the way?
Totally. I mean, we love Iowa so much. There's definitely like a strong kind of familial sense in the state, and very supportive kind of community feeling, and that kind of Iowa nice vibe is a real thing. And we love the state so much that we more or less live here at least half the time, and split time between Iowa and California, just because, we find the people to be extremely inspiring, the community to be inspiring, and also just even the landscape is inspiring. Yeah. The kind of the rolling hills and cornfields and nature that you don't necessarily get in a big city. But yeah, it's a one of a kind place.
When it comes to filmmaking, a lot of your credits don't just include writing. They don't just include directing. They include producing as well. You've kind of ran, the whole spectrum there when it comes to the filmmaking process. At what point did you feel like it was the best option for you to take on, all of those aspects, as opposed to saying, I'm just going to write, or I'm just going to direct? Why try and tackle, all of those things? What was it that kind of motivated you to feel like that was really the best position for success for you?
When I think about like all those hats that we were wearing, I can't separate it from our time growing up in Iowa, meaning there wasn't like a huge filmmaking presence, and so you had to create your own opportunities here. And so when Bryan and I were starting to make our movies here in the Quad Cities, we were doing all the different jobs. We were boom operating, we were doing focus pulling, we were, doing the clapperboard and the slate and such. And all the appreciation for those jobs showed you had to pour your heart and entire self into making these movies. And from the job of like producing, like willing a movie into being, in addition to writing and directing, meant that you're trying to see a 360 view of the filmmaking process. That's always been incredibly fascinating to us. We're students of cinema history and of filmmaking, and for us, the pathway to trying to get a career in Hollywood, there's one similarity, and it's always to create your own opportunities. And even when we're writing something like A Quiet Place and trying to get that made, yes, it got made at Paramount Pictures with John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, but there was always a version of that script that we wrote thinking, worst case scenario, if nobody wants this, we can go back to Iowa and produce this for a very small budget. We know exactly the farm that we're going to shoot on in West Branch, Iowa. We know the crew that we can bring in, and you just kind of manifest those opportunities into being.
I also think that there's just a huge love of film in our hearts. There's a feeling of like, I mean, it's such a privilege and honor to be able to write and direct and produce and wear all these different hats and now be theater owners in the Quad Cities. It's very exciting. But if our job was simply getting Hugh Grant coffee or bringing, you know, Adam Driver his lunch on set, like we would do that too, because it's just fun to be surrounded by the movie business. It's just something that we've loved ever since we were kids, and we're, you know, we're really excited to be now professional champions of like the theater going experience and encourage people to get back out to theaters and enjoy movies with audiences, because we think it's just such a wonderful art form.
When it comes to that process, you know, A Quiet Place was certainly that thing that propelled you both into the spotlight, and it had great success, you know, great reviews, box office. It had to start with an idea. That was not a property that existed. It was not a, you know, a franchise that existed. It came from you two. And, you know, you're doing the same with your upcoming film, Heretic. How is it that you get started from that kernel of an idea, unintended for the Iowa audience there, to that final process to say, this is exactly the story we wanted based on that first idea? Because certainly that's not an easy process.
It's usually just, you know, Scott and I talking and getting excited about an idea. The good ones always stick around for a while. I think A Quiet Place, we came up with the broadest strokes of that idea for the movie when we were attending the University of Iowa. We had this idea of like doing a modern day silent film that was like kind of in the creature, you know, kind of horror genre. And then, you know, over years it evolved. Heretic, this is similar in the sense that I think that the first inklings of the idea came to us about 10 to 12 years ago, somewhere in there. And it's been long gestating. So it's just whatever gets us excited and keeps us talking. We talk every single day. We're constantly coming up with ideas for movies, but the reality is 98% of our ideas are terrible. And so you just kind of keep iterating and trying new stuff, and we're our own harshest critics. So we kind of, you know, we weed out the things that aren't exciting to us. And then you just hope, you never know, you just hope that the things that you're excited about, other people will be too. But, you know, the movie business is a tricky one, and the timing is such an important part. Sometimes you're excited about an idea, and then by the time the movie comes out, maybe it doesn't feel as cool anymore, or vice versa. A lot of our favorite filmmakers are often ahead of their time and are making movies that people are scratching their heads at for the first 10 to 20 years, and then they don't connect until later on. But yeah, it's fun, and we keep little notebooks and journals, and we're just always constantly writing down cool stuff.
God, is that hard? Because you hear this from filmmakers all the time, you know, oh, this is an idea I had years ago and maybe I never got around to it, or, you know, in the context or the time, it wasn't right. How hard is it to still feel confident in that sort of idea years after it maybe first popped up, especially when you've got to pitch it to studios, or you've had the idea, but maybe time has passed and your view on something has changed? How hard is that to still think and believe that that idea is worth pursuing?
I think if there's a concept for a movie that we personally really believe in, it's actually very easy for us to like walk into a studio and pitch it with excitement, because that excitement usually has stuck around for 10 years. And if something has that longevity, then we truly believe there is a connection there. That connection can be, you know, a movie that plays the audience like a piano, like it's just an exciting thriller. Or with Heretic, which is a movie that kind of delves into ideological conversations of religion, but in the body of like a genre movie. That to us is an interesting collision, the same way that A Quiet Place was a collision of a silent film, but also a monster movie. And so the undercurrent of those ideas, those are what keep us going. And if it keeps us going, then it actually can be a very, very simple process for us to continue that excitement and perpetuate that.
Let's talk more about Heretic now. Comes out November 8th, starring Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, Chloe East. I'd like both of you to give me and give the audience a brief synopsis of this movie to kind of pull us in. Maybe they haven't seen a trailer or they're hearing about this for the first time. What's this movie about in the quickest snapshot?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of always joke, like growing up in Iowa, you know, you're kind of told like the one thing you're not supposed to talk about at the dinner table is religion, because it's a very divisive topic. And so we basically wanted to make a movie that is about the most divisive topic in world history. So Heretic is about two young Mormon missionaries who are going around to various houses with different appointments, trying to preach the good word of the Book of Mormon. And they knock on the door of a Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant. And they sit down in his living room and they start discussing theology and exchanging, you know, their beliefs and how that intersects with his beliefs. And as the night goes on, things get scarier and scarier and scarier as they start to realize that Mr. Reed is a man who claims to know what the one true religion is. And as the night goes on, he's going to show them what he thinks the one true religion is. And it's basically the film is a conversation about extremely sensitive and tough topics. We tried to kind of use this cerebral, almost stage-like dialogue driven story and put it in the context of a popcorn movie. So our hope is that when people see the movie, it's extremely entertaining, it's fun, it's scary, it's funny, it has lots of different registers. But we also hope that it's thought-provoking, and that when people leave the theater, they're talking about their own beliefs and how that does or doesn't intersect with the concepts in the film as well.
And I think like one of the aspects that you know, people may want to know going to this movie, like one, we have incredible partners at the studio A24. Most notably, they did the Oscar-winning film Everything Everywhere All at Once. They've done really exciting horror films like Hereditary, Midsommar, Talk to Me, on and on. They have an interesting collision where they're movies that are instantly accessible to an audience. I mean, they are thrillers and genres and comedy-driven movies, but at the same time, like they're a little deeper and sometimes they're a little off kilter, and that runs at the heart of what Heretic is. You know, Heretic is a scary movie, but it's also a movie about ideas. Hugh Grant is somebody that has had a relationship with an audience in the world of like romantic comedies, most notably. But this performance that he turns in, it weaponizes that relationship that he's built with worldwide audiences. He's, you know, at once incredibly witty, incredibly charming, very intellectual, and yet he goes to very, very dark places in this role. Which to us, the collision of his persona mixed with what this movie is getting at the heart at was a really exciting asset of the film.
You mentioned kind of how the general audience thinks of Hugh Grant in those previous roles. So was he the guy that you had envisioned for this role kind of from the beginning? And how did you land him? Like, how do you actually pitch it to him, his representation, to make sure that, again, your vision for the script, your vision for the story actually matches up once it comes to casting?
The role is extremely challenging. We if you were gonna rank like the difficulty level of pulling off Mr. Reed, I would definitely rate it as an 11 out of 10 difficulty. And so it felt like we were looking for a unicorn to play this role. And the script started passing around Hollywood because it was just one of those things that agents knew, like, oh, if I could just get my client and in this movie, it would be really, it'd be a cool opportunity. And we had a lot of movie stars raising their hand to play the role. And so there was a lot of pressure we felt to make sure if we're going to cast somebody, it's got to be the perfect person. And so we just kept coming back to Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant, obviously we can weaponize, 30 years of goodwill with an audience, but he also is just, for our money, one of the greatest actors of all time. And he's been expressing and showing his, not only his talent, but his pursuit of risks and big swings in the last 10 years of playing amazing supporting roles in Guy Ritchie films. He's the villain in Paddington 2. He's an Oompa Loompa and Wonka of all things. Like, he's taking all these insane risks, and we really found that inspiring, just as movie lovers. Okay. And so when we just kept talking about Hugh, we're like, we got to the point where we were basically like, it's either Hugh or nobody. It's either Hugh says yes, he'll do this movie, or the movie should not be made because the role is that difficult. And so there was a little bit of wooing process that went into it, but we were really we felt really lucky when he said he wanted to be in the film.
Heretic seems to be one of those films where, the physical proximity of characters can kind of breed tension. Some thrillers are post-apocalyptic and there's vast landscapes. There's cross-country journeys. This is set in a house. This is set in a house from the footage in the trailers, and so you have a lot of the cast, three individuals being around a living room table, being around a house. How did that play into how you're scripting? Because there's dialogue directly back and forth. There's probably not a lot of long gaps in action or silence because of just how close this movie seems to be. Did that play into how you wrote and directed it, and why was it important to set it in that way?
Yeah, I think our excitement to contain Heretic into a single setting comes from the idea of just pressure cooking tension. The way that we adore Hitchcock and the way that he's able to make everything feel a little more claustrophobic as like a movie goes on and on. So for us, like, the house is another character in and of itself. It's a house that you go deeper into it and you're not sure what's going to lie behind each door, which to us, in a very metaphorical way, mimics the experience that the audience hopefully has and the experience that the characters in the movie really has. These characters, knock on Mr. Reed's door and they're there to share their faith, but what they get is so much more. And it goes to different depths that you're not quite expecting as you walk into Mr. Reed's house. At first there's a degree of charm and comfort that you have in one of the first scenes of the film that you see in the trailer as they're sitting down in the living room and discussing their belief systems. But the more that the conversation opens up, the more there's a sense of there might be danger here, or am I just overthinking things? And I think that's a feeling of discomfort that everybody has had in their life at some point, and this movie really throttles off of that sensibility.
We've mentioned A24 a couple of times in their resume, and the films in this kind of scope that seem to fit. What made it the right partnership for this film? And were you the ones pitching this script directly to them, or were they kind of looking for these types of projects and it just kind of matched up that way?
Well, every time we finish a script, we write it independently ourselves, and then we take it to the marketplace with the producing team. And in this case, we were lucky to have Stacey Sher, who is a legend in Hollywood. She produced everything from Pulp Fiction to several, like Aaron Brockovich, several Steven Soderbergh films, and on, Quentin Tarantino movies, Hateful Eight and Django Unchained. And so we take the project out, and the marketplace received the film really warmly, warmer than we thought. We wrote this movie. We're like, no one's going to want to make this. This is an insane, ridiculous movie that only we want to watch. And we were happy that everyone was excited about it. But the major studios, wanted this to make the movie, but they were like, we'll make the movie if there's less conversation about religion and less philosophical undertones in the movie. And that that was not exciting to us, because that's the whole reason we're making the movie, is to talk about these difficult subject matters. A24 is a studio that is afraid of no risk. They are extremely brave in their choices. And so they wanted to make exactly the movie we wanted to make. And honestly, like, just to be crystal clear, we are diehard A24 fans ever since dating back to like the Bling Ring, like some of their earliest movies, and we've been following their trajectory as a studio for years. When they started producing films, it felt like oh wow, like somebody's made a whole business out of making the movies that we wish we could make, which is to say movies that are entertaining, super cool, but artful, like a combination of like a popcorn movie and an art house movie, with exciting filmmaking voices. That to us is what their brand means. And when I say that it is like the highest honor to work with them, I mean, like, it is truly a dream come true.
Scott, you're wearing a shirt that says "See movies in movie theaters," and so what I want to ask both of you, with this film in particular, you've been, making films for several years, and the landscape has changed, and there's different platforms, even the movie theater experience means different things to different people.
Yeah.
So some it means opening night right when it comes out. Some, hey, I'm going to wait for reviews to kind of trickle in before I determine if I'm going to go see it in person. So, how direct was the approach to this movie? People should see this in a movie theater. That's the goal. And different filmmakers may have different approaches. Hey, I just want anybody to take this, or I want as many people to see it, even if they're at home. What was the intentionality and strategy behind making sure this had a theatrical release? And, to go back to your shirt, like, why should this be seen in theaters?
Yeah, every movie that Brian and I create is a movie that we designed for people to see in movie theaters. When we created A Quiet Place, that was a movie to put on the big screen and really enjoy with an audience and feel, this tension of moments of silence and these moments of like this giant, sound, and that entire soundscape was really additive to that experience when people showed up to movie theaters. Heretic is no different. It is a thriller. It is a movie that at times is terrifying. Other times, it uses Hugh Grant's charm to really disarm the audience, and he brings such incredible dark humor to the experience. And we've seen this film now in packed houses at the Toronto Film Festival with 2,000 people. Last week, we were in Los Angeles for the premiere at the American Film Institute at the Grauman's Chinese Theater with 1,000 people. This movie is so fun to watch with the audience. You're being provoked in the same way. You're laughing. You're being terrified at the same time. The theatrical movie going experience, there's no lie that like there's been a hit, with the pandemic and with streaming, but there is a communal aspect that we're really, really big advocates for. It's the heart of why we opened up our independent movie theater, The Last Picture House in Davenport, Iowa, to bring movies back to the big screen and make that experience fun.
And it's been really special at our theater in Iowa. We have a rooftop screening component where on the rooftop we screen movies at night, and a lot of them are like older films, and it's so fun to watch your community come out and watch these films together. There's really nothing better. So we just, it's a thing that we hope just kind of keeps growing and growing. We really do believe that that kind of idea of an experiencing something, not just watching something on Netflix while you're kind of on your phone and not really paying attention, but like actually having an experience. There's nothing better than going to the movies.
You have a screening of the film Saturday, tomorrow, November 2nd, at the Last Picture House in the Quad Cities. How excited are you two to both be able to have that shown kind of in your hometown on the big screen? And what are you looking forward to most about finally the movie being released?
Hmm. Well, I think anytime we're making a movie, the biggest end goal in sight is showing that movie to the communities that have supported us in Iowa. The Quad Cities specifically, but Iowa as a whole has such a special place in our heart because it is where we've had our first collaborations with crew and actors and started making movies and putting them up in Iowa movie theaters. And so every single movie that we release, we come back home to Iowa and we're there to share it with the community. And it's so fun to see familiar faces of people that made such an imprint on your life, whether they were teachers or neighbors or family members that really encouraged the filmmaking bug.
And I'm really excited about the screening coming up because we're actually bringing in the star of Heretic, Chloe East, to come into town. She's very busy. She's promoting Heretic and she's shooting a movie right now. And yet she's being kind enough to come back to Iowa, and support the film and this theater because she's a kindred spirit. She's a movie lover as well, and to be able to have her come and talk with our audience and do a Q&A. We're also having the costume designer of Heretic, Betsy Hyman, come back and do a Q&A as well, and she's a legend. She did Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. She created the costumes for those movies, Almost Famous and Jerry Maguire. It's to be able to bring that to an area that doesn't necessarily get those opportunities is quite a joy.
Yeah. But yes, the movie opens up, November 8th, and we're thrilled to be able to finally have it unleashed upon audiences. It's opening up today in the United Kingdom, and we're already, getting inundated with messages and reactions to the film. And it is a movie that we do think is really fun to see in movie theaters. Hopefully it challenges you in an intellectual way, but also thrills you in just a very visceral way. It's the combination of those two things, the same way that A Quiet Place was a combination of silent films and horror films. So we hope people show up in movie theaters and check it out.
The movie is Heretic, starring Hugh Grant, Sophie, Thatcher, Chloe East. Again, tickets available now. Go see it in a local theater. Scott and Brian, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
Really
much.
appreciate it.
Our pleasure.